I think that's how we opened the show, okay, which is he needed 10 seconds to get used to the idea that we're shooting. But in fact, we're at a great place, Masonic Temple, right?
Yes.
In Holyoke. And we've been invited in graciously, and we've gotten Silas, Kopf,
Yes.
to come and talk to us about it because he has appreciation in his work of craft and history, and there's big history.
Absolutely. So the Masonic Temple, and there is the Mount Tom Lodge in the Masonic Temple
In the town.
in Holyoke, Mass. We're going to give some information later on as far as when this one was built. And but yeah, as you said, we have asked and have graciously been invited to come in and do this episode with Silas. And so Silas he's here. Silas,
I am
would you
here.
join us?
Please.
I'm going to come over and join you guys.
Fantastic.
You should.
All right.
You should.
Please have a seat.
Good
Hi.
to see you.
Pleasure to meet you.
We
see you.
sometimes stand up,
Stand,
not
and
every time.
No, we're not standing.
My
no,
stand-
I'm old.
My standing up was delayed.
Old and decrepit.
I make that claim every day if I have to, but
That you're old?
yeah, you don't look like you're suffering, so there you are. Anyhow, it's really nice for us to talk about this place with a man who, I almost feel like can you actually, to the way you would introduce yourself, somebody said, what are you up to? Or do you have a shtick of some sort?
Not obviously. I make furniture.
Yes.
And have been woodworking for 50 years now. And I grew into the specialty of marquetry, which is making inlaid pictures in wood. So I make a furniture object and decorate the object with a picture, some sort of decorative picture. It could be a tabletop, chair backs, cabinet doors, etc.
Right.
And actually, I know that you have some stuff you want to get into, but I thought just right off the bat, I know that Ed actually had mentioned this, that you call yourself an artisan, I believe.
Yeah.
As opposed to an artist. And,
Correct, or craftsperson.
Craftsperson,
Yeah,
and
I feel more crafty than
good.
artsy.
And I picked up on that right away because I think that is an important distinction. And I think that also kind of ties in with where we are in the Masonic Temple, seeing as the history of the Freemasons comes from guilds and from Masons, 1600s. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Again, we'll look that up. and
Earlier.
I think even earlier than
Even
that.
we just found that out.
Cathedral.
Oh, okay.
On the walk up the stairs, we got
Cathedral
educated.
building.
Yeah.
I have seen your work, and I've been aware of you, and I'm happy to finally meet you. I think you know Peter Dellert, possibly.
Yeah, of course.
He's a
Yep.
good friend of
Yep.
mine, and he's spoken with you, and he knows that that we were going to ask you to be a guest here. So,
Okay,
so
good.
this is
He's been a good friend for a long time.
fantastic. So going back to, it occurred to me also that the word artist, artisan, they both start with art. So I don't know. I don't know how, how did this split, if there ever was a split, happen? Why is there a distinction between artists and artisans? I mean, in a way, it's sort of more of a line.
Well, it certainly can be.
Yeah.
I mean, you can find artisans who are artists as well. And but for me, the distinction is it's a technical ability. Somebody they're I don't know what the Greek word is, but they're skillful in what they do, and that isn't necessarily always the case with art. Maybe
Yeah, good
artists
point.
are going to dispute that, but I personally like to see something that's not just well conceived and well thought out, but well done.
Well crafted, yes.
Right. In fact, that was part of the reason why we talked and you were receptive to coming. Because I said, we're not just going to talk about what did you do and how, but we're going to talk about craft, right? And that becomes a point. In fact, I told you about my friend Martin Chirino. He's a sculptor in Spain. He's quite well known, who finally just said, I don't want to be called an artist as much as I prefer craftsman at this point. But the question of art is, that came up the other day. Do you think there's a question of whether it needs to be taught to be called art? Is there because you really can't teach some things that they call art nowadays.
Well, that would be your artisan art distinction there, because artisanry needs to be taught. Somebody, in my case, somebody needs to know how to properly sharpen a tool, and that isn't necessarily the case with all of the arts. So that's where I come down, that it's important to have those skills, and then hopefully you can use those skills and translate them into an interesting art object, something that people want to look at.
And also it occurred to me that there was a time pre-photography where, again, artisans, craftspeople, and artists, but let's say visual artists, painters, someone who was able to paint a likeness of a person to such degree that anybody would look at it and say, I know exactly who that is, and that's amazing. How did you achieve that? So there was a purpose for that type of painter, to do portraits, essentially, family portraits, what have you, for generally rich people who could afford it. And then with the advent of photography, I guess that's kind of where things split for painters or whatnot, or visual artists, and perhaps got a little more conceptual. So again, I'm going to ask you where I'm going with this, because that's...
Yeah, because you're being a little nice. I'm more cruel. I don't really like the fact that it no longer is involved in craft. Yeah, I don't care what kind of art you're talking. I like craft. And I think you must.
I like paintings that are crafted.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, I can look at my example might be Raphael. I think it was just he manipulated that brush so beautifully, or Degas is another one that strikes me that way. And so I do think that there is room for somebody who can manipulate the medium, whatever that be, maybe be it oil paint or carving in stone or whatever.
Yeah, good point.
When you say there's room for someone, are you saying you feel that painters can be pushed out of the craft perspective, the way things are going?
I'm not sure I was necessarily going there, but I think that there's still room within the art world, even given the ability to photograph or manipulate things with a computer or this, that, and the other thing. There is still room for somebody to be able to express themselves in a beautiful sort of way with a well-maneuvered brush.
Right. True. Then to follow up on that, doesn't it happen with your work that somebody sees it maybe from across the room and then they come up close and they begin to realize the depth of the craft?
Well, I always hope that.
Well, yes.
I hope that there is that oh wow factor that what I do, if we're looking at it from 50 feet away or something like that, somebody say, wow, that's a good painting.
Yeah.
And then they get up closer and realize, oh no, that's all made out of little pieces of wood. And so there's, I think that elicits that wow factor that people want to be moved that way. They want to realize that somebody has been able to make something special that looks challenging.
Yeah.
Which I think yours is. Do you want to? Let's talk about that.
Yes. Can I start that by saying, because I wanted to make sure I got this in. So when we were discussing inviting you as a guest, it was Ed's idea. This was maybe a few weeks ago, and I happened to be in Salem. I went to the Peabody Essex Museum, and there I'm like, wow, I'm looking at a piece of Silas's here. And as I approached it, it looked to me like a table, and there was what seemed to be some calligraphy.
Correct.
And there was a quill or a pen.
Or
and
a
the whole
pen,
and the whole thing looked exactly like I could go and maybe move the quill out of the way. So, but then you get close and you're like, oh wow, it's flat. And so that is kind of, I mean, it was pretty impressive. And I am familiar with your work, and it does have quite an incredible the wow factor, the painterly factor. And anyway, so yeah, if you wanted to, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Well, let me give him a lead in on the wow.
Good.
Isn't that what you, by doing marketing, is that what you
marquetry?
Marquetry.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you've done with furniture? You've added a wow factor, and I mean, it's a little bit cheap sounding, but no, there's something magical when you add that to furniture.
I think so. For me, it is, because it is difficult, and so what would you liken it to? I'm thinking music now. That when we listen to somebody who can really play the piano and leave you with that stunned thing of saying, I can't believe anybody's fingers can move that fast, or whatever. Somebody, I'm hoping that somebody will look at what I do and say, I don't see how he did it.
That's right.
That brings me as the looker, as the viewer, some sort of internal pleasure, to think that somebody did that.
Yeah, I would say so. So for you personally, when you think of your work or you start to talk about where you get your pleasure in it, because it's a discipline and it's work at some point. What do you find when you go to your work that sustains this? Because you've done it for a few years.
I have been doing it a long time, and I am okay admitting that it doesn't have the same pizzazz for me that it did maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So I have to look for new things that are going to get me excited about going into the studio, because to some degree doing the work is repetitive. Doing a marquetry picture of a flower versus a human portrait or a bird or something abstract even, it's always a little bit the same. Technically it's the same. Cutting the wood is always the same. So I need the occasional infusion of something new about it. And that might be materials mostly I work with wood, but adding metal into the picture or mother of pearl or even plastic, whatever that might be, something that says, wow, that was new and that was interesting for me.
Even plastic.
Well, this is a great way to go into why don't you give us an example, and then maybe we can take a photograph of it.
Sure.
What would be an example of how you found something to do recently, and what were the materials that you needed?
Okay. One of the things that struck me, it isn't super recent, but it's pretty recent in my overall career, is I came across, I had always been intrigued with the idea of doing marquetry in stone. They did that in Italy back in the 17th century mostly. And it looks unbelievably laborious, and I believe it is, but it's also really beautiful because it's got these bright colors. You got lapis and you got malachite and rhodochrosite and all of these beautifully colored stones that have been pieced together to create these pictures. And I was always interested in doing it, but it just looked too onerous a task to learn how, for one thing. Then I encountered some work of a guitar maker in Canada who put stone inlay on a fingerboard of a guitar.
Wow.
And it was really cool. I thought, wow, this is great. And it's
a lot.
And it's bright and colorful, which my wood pictures are not necessary. I don't knock that. They look okay to me, but I thought it might be fun to do something with bright colors. So I called the guy up. We had been casual acquaintances from way back. And I said, tell me about this material, where'd you get it? And he was using something called a reconstituted stone, where the stone, say malachite, which is green, the malachite gets ground into a powder, glued back together with an acrylic into a brick of sorts.
Oh, I see.
But then because it's not the solid stone anymore, you can work it with woodworking tools,
right?
Saws, etc. So it can be sawn into veneers, which is what I would use.
Right.
So this guy said that's what he does. He buys the material in a brick form and saws it up into veneers and then uses it on these fingerboards. So it turns out that the company that makes this stuff is just down in Connecticut, and their primary outlet for these things were people who were making handles for knives.
Oh, really?
No kidding.
So I thought you were going to say countertops, but not that. That's more generic, right?
Well, these are also, they have to be pretty small. The bricks are only, they're literally the size of a brick. Wow. And it's expensive too.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right.
So I think we've all seen like pearl handle knives or something like that, or maybe gun handles or something along those lines. Well, these guys can do that with this stone. So you can get these bright colored bits of stone, and they actually put grain back into it somehow. I have no idea how that's done. Yeah.
So nuance, variations and nuances.
Correct.
Now it's in the stirring You know, I'm a sculptor, and this guy's a talented painter.
Thank you.
Is it in the stirring of materials?
I assume so, because they get these little lines.
Go ahead and guess.
In it.
We don't mind.
Yeah,
But anyhow,
yes, I'm going to be authoritative. That's exactly what they do.
There we go. There we go.
That's the way we go.
Set.
So the question is, what did you decide to do with this?
So
And didn't you just dull all your tools? You know, like,
Well, you can work with woodworking tools, so
Yeah,
it's,
so,
it's
yes,
not
but-
it's not any harder than
It
say
isn't.
working with mother of pearl.
good. Okay.
That would be it's not as hard as metal like brass or copper, but it's harder than wood.
And you still call it marquetry. It's not.
Correct.
It's not mosaic in wood. I mean, essentially. I mean, you're
I would,
laying it.
I would think of a mosaic as being much more geometric.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Like,
good point.
okay.
Working with a uniform.
Set of polygons. And
Yes,
stuff
and
like
then
that to
paint
put them
and
together.
use. I see. Okay.
Right.
Whereas you're actually cutting different shapes
Correct.
as you need them.
Correct.
So
Based
where,
on
where
color
did you
and
go
tone.
with this idea then?
Well, my first, I'm not 100% sure what the first picture I did was, but I think it was an aquarium scene with these bright colored tropical fish that, had blues and orange and stuff like that. Then not long after that, I did a chameleon, as if it was in a cage on a door.
Yeah.
And a great big giant chameleon. And so I had to a little bit I wanted to choose the recon, they call it recon stone, that had the grain in it so that it simulates the real look of the stone. It isn't just a color like a plastic or something like that.
That's good.
And so it turns out that the biggest variety of colors that they had was in the realm of green and blue and purple. So I can make a chameleon out of this.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Wow. Do you make sure you have a customer before you begin?
Not in those cases. It's pretty hard to get someone to commission a piece unless they have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be. So,
But you're a man with a reputation.
Well, but 90% of the commissions that I do are based on something that I've already built. So it would be a little bit hard to talk somebody in, or I think it would be, to commission me to make a thing with a chameleon. That was using the stone. They'd almost want to see it first. So, and I was confident enough on that particular project to just go ahead and do it.
Right. So are you still doing that? Excuse me, if you have an idea. Are you still doing that kind of work, or you moved back into your... Because I assume you're still working. You're
They
not
come,
just,
they come and go. So I haven't done anything with the stone for a while, but I could easily see going back into it or using metals. Metals are a lot harder to work with, but they're kind of cool too. You know, they stay shiny and hopefully they don't tarnish and so on and so forth. So I can imagine going back into it. I'm not doing it right now. I'm doing some commission work now that is based on things that I did years ago.
Should we follow up on that?
Well, actually,
what would you like?
should we follow up on that?
No, what his other work was that he decided to
Yeah.
do
Well,
version.
why not? I do have a specific question, but that can wait.
Yeah, you brought it up. What were the, like, you get an irresistible telephone call. They say,
Correct.
I want a piano. I've heard of you, or something like that. And so tell us how that happened.
Okay, my soon-to-be project, I haven't started yet, I haven't even done the drawings yet, but I was approached by a man who had seen my work, and I had done a lot of things with trompe-l'oeil, fool the eye. So looking like open cupboards that have objects within the cupboard, but it's all a flat surface and it's a door.
Well, good.
So he wanted something, he didn't know what he wanted, so we just flipped through my book and because that's the way I like to work on a commission. You got to give me some idea. I just can't. I'm just not going to do a dozen drawings for you. I want to have.
Good to know for when you commission.
Yeah, exactly.
Or when I get a commission.
Well, yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, good pointer.
That'll be a while.
so we sort of zeroed in on a piece that I built that he liked, that had that trompe-l'oeil factor. And then I said, okay, how about let's personalize this for you. Let's make it look like there's objects within this cabinet that means something to you. And it turns out that he was a wrestler in college, and he still feels
Man of your heart
for wrestling, and he still has his wrestling shoes. I didn't know that there were specific wrestling shoes, but he's still got his. And his wife's a photographer, and he said, well, let's start there. Let's start with the wrestling and a photography thing. So he brought me sent me the wrestling shoes and an older camera that his wife had. And so those are going to be sort of the basis of starting to put things into this composition.
That's funny. I should have saved my shoes. I didn't know you didn't say that. Yeah,
Former wrestler.
I was in that world a little bit. So you had another idea to talk about.
Well, going back to the craft, possibly. So you make the furniture as well,
Correct.
right? You make the furniture and then you do the marquetry. So
No, they go hand in hand.
they go hand. So you're a cabinet maker, I
Correct.
assume. And the distinction between cabinet making and carpentry, I'm aware of that, and
Yeah.
probably most people are. So, and you also talked about the trompe l'oeil effect on some of your pieces where you have, did you say like a recessed cabinet or
Right.
shelf?
This actually goes back to the Italian Renaissance,
Yes.
where they did pieces like this. They would make a panel that looked like it had doors that were cocked open, and you get that perspective drawing as part of that, and then objects within. There's a famous room down at the Metropolitan Museum in New York that was done in about 1500 that looks like that. All of the walls are done with these open cupboards, and they had objects that were of interest to the Duke, who was the one who commissioned this thing. So I've been doing things like that for years and years now, and I like to personalize it for people, like this guy with the wrestling shoes. So it looks like it's a recessed interior space in a cupboard, but it's actually the front of the piece is flat. And then that turns out to be a door that opens up.
That's so cool.
So I'm thinking, you said it goes back to the Renaissance period, and I don't know when it was, when perspective really was a thing.
Right around then, they were going hand in hand.
Yeah, so they realized they can have, with perspective and with that technique, you can create depth in paintings, but also in something like a...
Well, the interesting thing from my perspective about that is that this is when perspective drawing was being discovered, the geometric laying out with straight lines and the like there. But some of the woodworking is simple to cut. You take a saw and you cut the board and you get a straight line. So piecing together those geometries was almost a natural.
You have a built-in
for
ruler
this.
almost.
Exactly.
Exactly. And do you ever make any pieces that have actual secret panels, doors?
All the time.
You do,
well,
really?
Well, actually, that's something that's gotten my juices going here in the last couple of years.
Well, hopefully where we are, this space also, because there, I don't want to say the element of secrecy, but there's
secrets here with the Masons.
There are secrets with the Masons, and a lot of it is just ways of reinforcing camaraderie and.
What was the birth in the craft?
Yes.
We talked about that on the way
It was
up,
exactly. Yeah. So they go hand in hand.
You needed to know the geometry, which So to me, teaching the craft is part of the decision for how important it is as a part of art. Okay, they couldn't let you in, but you can call yourself an artist if you get the degree out of a college, right?
Right.
A little different. Would you think that maybe there should be an apprenticeship or a handshake or something to get to be an artist?
We live in an interesting era of education now, where a lot of people are learning things via Instagram or Facebook or something or other like that. And I think the idea of keeping your trade secrets is unfortunate to some degree. I mean, I made a video years ago on my technique and was happy to let anyone
that's interesting.
share in that.
Well, that's good. That's great. I completely agree with that attitude.
But it wasn't the end of him.
No, it wasn't.
They come say, okay, now we don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
No, but about the idea of getting the respect from the work is what happens if you do something you do, as opposed to if you learn how to throw paint. It's a little different.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
Thought I'd give you the chance. I was throwing you a softball.
Yeah, that was a softball. I mean, I like the idea that people are, younger people, if we're going into the educational thing there, that younger people, hopefully, let's just take woodwork as an example, or furniture making as an example, that they feel like they want to learn the technical parts of woodworking, making dovetail joints or mortise and tenons or carving or finishing or whatever. Excuse me. So that if I were to counsel a younger person about going into the field, I tell them, get your technical chops down, learn the craft, and then make your art. Because once you know the technical thing, it'll open up a whole new set of things that you'll be able to do that you wouldn't be able to do until you had that, until you knew how to manipulate a plane or whatever.
And
Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and as far as learning that craft and teaching that craft, I mean, there's several approaches. There are schools. What's your opinion of, say, an apprenticeship? So literally, you have a person who's experienced, such as yourself, and then you take on an apprentice or a series of.
Well, that's how I learned.
Okay, and actually, that's how I in addition to a painter, I'm an illustrator. I used to do a lot of commercial illustration, and I learned with an illustrator who had been in the trade for a while and was somewhat older than me, and I basically learned the ropes. And after a couple of years, I went off on my own. And then eventually, I got an apprentice or an assistant, whatever you want to call it, and basically passed on what I learned. And I, there's something to be said for that.
I think that seems to be the right way to go. My own personal background was that I had the fantasy of being a woodworker, but I had no skills. and it's hard to approach somebody to say, give me a job if you've got no skills. So you've got to get that first foot in the door to get that to happen. But I saw a man's work that I really was taken with. He was in Rochester, New York. And I actually moved to Rochester with the hope of having him take me on at some point. And I ended up getting a job in a basic cabinet shop, doing plywood boxes essentially. But every 3 months or so, I call him up and say, I'm still here, and I haven't hurt myself, still got all my fingers. And
which you seem to still have.
So after a year or so, he had an opening, and he called me. So my persistence paid off.
Yeah.
And that was just a great opportunity because he's highly revered in the woodworking world, and he got a guy to come and work for him who had the real craft chops from England. He got this younger man to come and be sort of shop foreman, and he really knew the crafty stuff that my mentor didn't necessarily know. My mentor was much more of art-oriented maker.
Oh. I'm liking the sound of it. What about an apprentice for you? Have you got somebody to pick up your
I don't
skills?
know, but I've had people working for me for years. Generally at one point I had two, and it proved to be just too much for me because I felt committed to making all the pictures. And so the other people could do the three-dimensional building. And so that formula worked out okay. The picture and the cabinet were kind of coordinated. And about 5 years ago, I just sort of said, I don't want to be wedded to this 40 hours a week anymore. 30 hours would be fine. And then that proved untenable in terms of having the employee. So we parted. And now, interestingly, I'm doing it all myself, doing the cabinet making too, which I hadn't done for decades, really, building the three-dimensional thing. And that's proved to be kind of fun. I'm not as efficient as my helpers had been. They were much better cabinet makers than I. But, and I spent a lot of time scratching my head and trying, okay, what's next here? Or backtracking when I make a mistake or something like that. But at any rate, it is fun doing those fundamental woodworking things that I hadn't done for a long time, making a dovetail joint, for instance.
Sure, but do you have to know now what the wrestler's shoes are going to be on a cabinet or on a, do you have it in your head what kind of piece of furniture?
I know basically what the piece of furniture is going to be for this guy. It'll be a cabinet with two doors on it, looking like they're cocked open in some way, shape, or form, glass front, and you can see inside to where there's a shelf with the wrestling shoes on one shelf and the camera on the other, and that'll leave space for two or three other objects that maybe mean something to his children.
How did the glass? Did you understand that? I didn't.
No. So all of this is flat.
Correct.
And the glass is represented with wood.
Yes.
And so I mean, that sounds pretty amazing.
It looks transparent. So
Yeah.
you can see a frame
Yeah.
around the door that maybe even has mullions on it.
Yeah.
And so it looks like a glass front,
Okay.
or it looks like a glass door, but
So
it's obviously not.
so our brain sort of
Your
filled,
brain,
based on all the clues around you,
Correct.
you're like, well, that's glass.
Exactly.
You see
Exactly.
how you are? You just said the glass on the front like it was real. You know, like that's where your art
Yeah, there you
head
go.
lives. Good.
Yeah, he's a master illusionist, I would say.
Apparently he is, and that, you know, you can live with that. So do some of the people you taught practicing and you know what they're doing, or did they just go off and make movies or something?
Oh, man. The people who worked for me doing the cabinet work moved on and are still doing
Right.
woodworking stuff. In terms of teaching people to do the marquetry stuff,
Right.
I mean, I think that I've created some waves out there in the world but that was more through teaching workshops and I did I did a video and I wrote a book.
Great. So you passed on the cop technique.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. I mean, so yeah, that's
I
that
think
resonates
we're
well.
getting close to the end of
Yeah,
our 20
yeah.
minutes, but I want to do one last thing. You're going to chop it in. What do
Absolutely.
you find when you're going to do the beautiful way the wood pieces go together? It's sort of like people, when they talk about paintings, they talk about brushwork. So when you look at somebody else's marquetry, what do you see? Where is the essence of the craft that you really work to make sure
what is he looking
that
out for?
your signature and the beauty of what
Yeah,
you're doing?
I'm looking for really tight joints, no glue lines around
interesting.
anything. That's important.
Yeah.
Right?
And then I'm also looking at the wood selection. That did they pick out a piece of wood that told the story? If they wanted to make it darker and the basic look of something was birch, and okay, they found that piece of cherry that was a little bit darker that told the story.
So you're looking right at that when you see somebody else's work. You notice it.
Hopefully I don't notice it on that level, but it's subtle.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That as I look at it, did it?
Oh, that's true,
it
because you
capture
would be
me?
looking at it actually in the museum or in the art. You wouldn't be back in their garage looking and saying, "Hey, hold it! You're not doing it."
Well,
No, it's not like that, is it? But you are a senior citizen in that world, aren't you? You
Yeah.
have a little bit of a responsibility.
Really
Don't they
old.
call you up and say, "Hey, would you come look at my stuff?" I mean, don't you feel a little bit like a guy who did a lot? And
I've had the occasional person send me pictures of what they've done and ask for a sort of critique.
right.
well, that's good.
And I'm okay to do that on some level, but I'm also I'm not entirely comfortable with being that person.
King of the Hill or whatever
Yeah.
whatever we can call you. We're going to call him the King of the Hill for this.
Sure,
Can
I
we do
mean,
that with
sure,
subtitles in? King of the Hill.
King of the
Okay.
Hill.
You know, out of the unpretentious life in Northampton or something. I don't know.
East Hampton.
Oh, you didn't.
Studios in East Hampton. I live in Northampton.
Well,
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's
I thought you
why-
lived
that's
in
why
that-
I
in
wanted
that-
to pick it.
I did live there for a while, but I'm not there now.
Aren't you down the street from Nancy? So we give
next door.
Nancy a little thing.
Right next door.
Well, you want to call her right now? What?
Yes, we kept saying we're not going to do the usual talk show, so why don't we do something?
wait,
anyhow?
I don't know if we
Look,
should call
it's
her.
delightful.
Yes.
See, we're trying to keep this at a.
Yeah, I mean, I always forget to look at the clock when we start, but I think it's over
We're
20,
trying to
25.
say half hour is what people
Yeah.
can watch, and
Yep.
also we want to put a few of his pieces
Yeah,
of
we'll do
work
that.
in, and
Yeah.
and maybe we should come over and see his place. We don't have to talk.
Sure.
Well, if we get an invitation, we might.
Of course, you got the invitation.
I mean, I looked at a lot of your work on your website, and I mean, it's quite incredible, and I'm very happy that
Thank you.
that you came
Yeah.
and agreed
So
to
let's
meet with us.
Let's keep it at.
Yeah, we're gonna actually show a little bit more of this fantastic place we're in and talk about that.
Excellent.
Because I think you're gonna see some really interesting things
But
here.
Okay.
let's just say we don't know about the Kappa, but the thing is that part of the reason you're here is there was a time where you couldn't join unless you did the craft,
Yeah.
right? And that was the barrier. That barrier doesn't exist in art anymore, for the name art, but for your craftsman work.
And that's a little bit of a loss.
Yeah, that's a good
That
point.
you don't have to slog your way through the steps to step up to being master craftsman or master
Yeah.
painter. And speaking of the Renaissance, they had to go through that too.
Yeah,
You know,
you're right.
Giotto and probably Raphael and so on and so forth had to start out and prove to somebody that they could do it.
Exactly. And we don't know of the people who were thrown off the train and the side.
Right, that's
We're
for
never
sure.
going to be heard from. We heard from you, and thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, you're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
All right.
Fantastic.
Indeed.
Masonry in this world is extremely relevant. It's a place where civil discourse, camaraderie, fraternity, fraternal love prevails. There cannot be dissension in Freemasonry. That's just not part of who we are. That's not part of what we do. How you feel about a person outside the lodge, even if he's in the lodge, is irrelevant. When he's in the lodge, he is your brother in every sense of the word, and he is treated accordingly. And that is really the ethos of Freemasonry. It's often said that Masons have 6 million friends they've never met, because I can go anywhere in the world, and if I come across a person that's a Freemason and I identify myself as a Freemason, I have a friend and a brother who will be with me, who will meet my needs, who will do whatever it takes. He is my brother.
But the values underneath it are not just brotherhood. Do you feel they have a broader application?
Absolutely, because Masonry seeks to serve all mankind. And mankind, which of course includes womankind, humanity is a better word. Masonry is the light. And we're told to show the light of Masonry into the world, which means peace, compassion, love, friendship, understanding, charity. One of the biggest values of Freemasonry is charity, which can also be considered as love. Love for our fellow humans. And we are bound not to be sources of dissension, conflict. We are bound to be peacemakers. That is what our obligation tells us to do.